it's kind of difficult to come back to a service and to present on after such an incredible trip. It's like you want to, come back with a fire hose, but you can't come back with a fire hose and just overwhelm people. And just doing like a little 3-minute recap video certainly wouldn't do it justice. So we're just going to drip it out over the next several weeks. And in fact, a lot of what we experienced there, we're going to weave into our Easter series, which starts in a couple weeks. So there's going to be a lot of media to come, videos and pictures. It's really hard to explain in words. And so we'll do our best to present it through word and pictures and video for you. But for today, I just have a word on my heart that certainly I will weave in a little bit of our trip and the experiences of it, just kind of an overarching theme of what I came back with and really experiencing something that has to be experienced to be fully appreciated. First of all, India is just, it's almost, we almost felt at times if we were like plopped onto a different planet. It's really how different it is, just the everyday life and just how people go about their lives is just so very different. Yeah, if you think about it, you have about almost 1.5 billion people live in India. I mean, it's a massive population, and they all live in a territory or an area that's roughly a third the size in landmass of the United States. So triple the population and 1/3 the space. And so it's kind of sort of makes sense of why people go about their business the way that they do. It's just kind of like every man for himself in a lot of ways. It's just people doing what they have to do. There's not a lot of decorum. There certainly isn't a lot of just common courtesy that we see. It is fading here. Amen, somebody. We're seeing less and less of it. But it's not the same common courtesy that you see here. Driving, for example, is really the best example of that. Driving, people ask, like, what was like the craziest part, or what was the scariest part, or what was, hands down, not even a close second, driving was the scariest thing in India by far. Now, I'm a pretty brave person. I don't shy away from a lot, but I don't think I would attempt to drive in India, not even down the block. When people say, well, what's it like? It's kind of hard to explain what it's like. So the best way, I was telling the guys about on the way home, and the best way to explain it, it's if you've ever seen the Jason Bourne movies, it's like a Jason Bourne car chase at all times, okay? Mission Impossible, whatever your favorite action movie is, it's a Jason Bourne car chase. And I'm not exaggerating. Am I exaggerating, guys? Not at all. It's like that just driving down the street. And what I mean by that is that, first of all, you have cars, vans, buses, trucks, and then you have motorcycles and mopeds, and then you have rickshaws, which are the little kind of like 3-wheel, like moped taxis, and then you have bicycles, cows, pedestrians, babies and children, like right on the edge of the road, and a lot of just 2-lane roads. And there's really no rules whatsoever, and there's certainly no traffic violations that I could see, and there's no yield signs, and if there were, they wouldn't abide by them anyway. And so at any given time, you're behind a vehicle that's slower than you, okay? And which means you're going to pass them, whether there's a double yellow or triple yellow or whatever, it doesn't even matter. You're going to pass them because the fastest car has the right of way in India, for no doubt, without a doubt. And the horn is like the best tool that you have. It doesn't mean you cut me off, you jerk. It means, I'm coming, I'm passing you, you're going too slow, I'm about to move around you, I'm about to turn. It means all kinds of things. And so at any given time, you're passing a rickshaw that's driving too slow in front of you, and then coming the other way, there's a tour bus that's also passing a rickshaw that's going too slow for them. So it's us and a bus, and that's it. And on the right, there's motorcycles, and on the left, there's cows, and so you can't go, and so we're going to die for sure. And then somehow, some way, you gain enough speed, and you're able to pass, and they're able to pass, and you miss each other by an inch. And that's it every single time you hit the road. It's absolutely terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. And that's what it was like there. And it's interesting because it kind of makes sense when you go into, a public place or airport, for example, because people just kind of walk around the same way, and it's just like you don't even exist, and it's just like, you're just standing in the airport security line for 2 hours like everybody else, and like just 5 people just cut in front of you and bump you out of the way, like you're not even there. They don't even pay attention to you, don't even look at you, and that's just how you get by. It's really kill or be killed, eat or be eaten, and it makes sense to me when you have that many people sharing that little space and just trying to live like you and I try to live. And so if I'm a little discombobulated today, jet lag, came back with a little bit of a cold, and just 2 weeks of an unbelievable trip. And that was an adventure from start to finish, right, guys? I just said adventure. I mean it. There's an adventure from start to finish. You want to have an adventure, go on a missions trip. Yes. Go on a missions trip. You want to live life to the fullest, go on a missions trip to another country, particularly a third world country, and just see how people live, but also see how God moves in a tremendous way, greater than I see him move here in America. Way greater. I had to like preach sermons like with no notice whatsoever, and it just totally depended on God. No Bible, no notes. Guys can back me up on that. And that's it. Just depend on God. Let's go. And that's really how it is to be a believer there, is there's such dependency on God that we leave very little room to depend on all the other things that we depend on here at home. And so you see, how that translates. We were in a prayer service with with the orphans at one point. By the way, they pray better than us. They worship harder than us. They read the Word more than us. Here, you know how it is. You ask somebody to pray out loud. You mean pray out loud in front of people? And there, they say pray, and 46 orphans at once just all start praying. It just becomes this chorus to heaven. So we're in a prayer meeting, not really a prayer meeting. We were just it was like a prayer meeting. And it was so powerful. It got to a point where the presence of God was just so thick that it just became silent. And one of the leaders there noted that it was like the silence in heaven in Revelations, the 30-minute silence of heaven, just such a presence and power. And I thought to myself, man, like, I've only been in another prayer meeting as powerful as that, and it was when I went to visit Gene McGuire in Rockview State Penitentiary with 200 hardened criminals. Did I ever have a prayer meeting as powerful as that? What does that say? Well, it says that when we lean on God and really depend on, when Jesus is all we have, when Jesus is all we need and all we have, do we really experience him in the most tangible and powerful, real way? And while we lean on and depend on so many other things, as we tend to do here, we don't. That's why we don't experience him here. And we scratch our heads and we wonder why we don't experience the power and the presence of God. Is because we're so dependent on other things. And so we had so many things happen. I'll touch on a few, and I'll try to weave them into the point of my message today in the 30 or so minutes that I have. So one particular day, really one of my favorite days is we started out early in the morning. But by the way, we're at this point in the trip. We flew into Dubai. We had a couple days in Dubai. We flew to Delhi. We had a day in Delhi where we got to see the Taj Mahal. And then we spent the rest of the trip in Bihar, which is in the north, which is the poorest state in India. So India is India, and then you go to the poorest state, and you can imagine the poverty there. The city where the orphanage is in Bodh Gaya. So in this part of the trip, we're in Bihar. We've flown into there. We had this incredible reception. Many of you may have seen some of the social media posts of the video of our reception in Bodh Gaya at the orphanage. So one particular day, we're leaving early in the morning, and we're going to go visit about 4 villages where there are CFC churches there. And these are remote. These are just far, far away. We spent the entire day, didn't get back till late at night. So we had arrived at, I think it was the 3rd village of the day, and to get to this village, the roads were no wider than the wheelbase of the Jeep. It's pretty treacherous. conditions and the roads, dirt, of course, roads. It had rained for 3 days before we got there, 3 days straight. So the roads weren't in great condition. Still better than many of the roads in New Bedford and Fall River, by the way. But that's another story for another time. So we got into the village. We were received beautifully in this beautiful tent church, as many of these churches were. By the way, you have to understand, how these churches got there in the first place. They're doing their place, their thing, as we've been preaching about and teaching about, and as we're modeling for our vision as we expand into Dartmouth. They're doing their place, their thing, better than I've ever seen anywhere. Certainly better than we are. You see, when you go and you do for people what they cannot do for themselves, it opens up their heart to the gospel in such a way. That's how Jesus did it, right? Doing for people what they could not do for themselves. John chapter 4, the woman at the well in Samaria, and he says, give me a drink. He engages her, their place, their thing. Give me a drink. She says, I have nothing to draw with, and what do I, a Samaritan, have to do with you, a Jew? And Jesus said, if you knew the gift of God and the one who was asking you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. And so there's this thing that happens when you're able to do something for somebody what they cannot do for themselves. It opens up their heart to the gospel. And so in many of these village churches, it started with a well. It just started with a hand-pumped, clean water well. They drilled 100 feet down. We were able to see that. And because we gave to them, CFC, Care for Children, and through this church, we're able to give to them what they did not have. It opened up their hearts to the gospel. And so relationship was made. And in some time, whether it be a year, 2 or 3, there was a church at places where there had not ever been believers. Talk about the Great Commission. Talk about the ends of the earth. Jesus said, I will come back once the gospel has reached the ends of the earth. This is the ends of the earth that Jesus is speaking about. Places that they had no idea who Jesus was. There were no believers, no churches, and now there was. Why? Because something was done for them that they could not do for themselves. Just a simple well. Something that we take for granted. Do you have the video of it's my 5th video, I think. I'm going out of order. That's okay. The joy of a village when a well is inaugurated. This happened when we were there. Can you imagine your kids turning on the faucet and rejoicing like that? That was the joy of the Lord. Why? Because we had done for them what they could not do for themselves. On an average, 3 to 5 villagers die a year when they have open wells that are polluted with animal feces and garbage. And so this is the difference between life and death. And so the clean water gives way to the living water. So many of these villages had one of our Care for Children wells. Many of you have donated. And through that well, we just thought you were giving clean water. Now there's a church there, some with a couple hundred believers where there had been no believers in the region before. So on this particular day, we're at the 3rd village of 4 that we saw. Please go to the first picture. This is one of my favorite pictures of all of the trip because there's so much happening here. Okay, there's so much happening here. I think there's Pastor Mario right by the hood of the car. That's you, right, Pastor Mario? He was taking the lead on trying to get us unstuck because we were stuck in some seriously deep mud. So we had gone down these treacherous roads, as I said. Somebody's bright idea was to take a different route out than the route that we took in. And we were like stuck in like a minute in deep, deep mud. We had tried every which way to get out of the mud, and we could not. And so the people around, so you see the women that are carrying, those are wheat fields, and they're just going about their daily business. And then, somebody with his cows were herded by at one point. And it's so primitive. It's like going back in time 2,000 years. And so what happened was no doubt one of these people, the townspeople, the village people, went back to the town elder because in about a half hour or so, a town elder, this is how things operate in these towns, a town elder came out to find out what was going on. He didn't seem very happy at first, turned out to be a really nice guy. And so as he's talking with the people that speak the same language, he says, well, we have a tractor. We have a tractor in town. And so we'll get you out with a tractor. And so after a while, a tractor backs into where we're stuck, and they don't have chains or ratchet straps. They're using rebar, I mean, just whatever they have, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. They use rebar, and they bend the rebar. They rip the bumper off the Jeep the first attempt, but eventually they get it, and we get pulled out, and it actually all happened quicker than if you called AAA when you're stuck here. And I don't think that's a lie. I really don't think that's even a lie. So we get pulled out, and that was the experience. The elder was alerted that, the dummy Americans got stuck in the mud again. These fools got stuck again, and they had to be helped out. But that just gives you an idea of the life there in some of these villages that are so primitive. Like Plymouth Plantation looks advanced, and I'm not exaggerating. It looks advanced to some of these places. The village that we were, not this one, but the fourth village, the last village we went to, we got there in the evening. We went inside the pastor's house. I don't have the picture, unfortunately. We went inside the pastor's house, and it looked like Plymouth Plantation looked advanced. The way that they cooked, it was the pastor, his wife, 4 daughters, all in this very small house, very primitive house. It looked like something out of a history book. So the village before this was one of the most incredible experiences. I'm going somewhere. Don't worry, I'm going somewhere. The village before this was on a mountaintop, and it was an unbelievable journey to get to. And as we approached the mountaintop, we saw posted on various locations men in fatigues with heavy artillery. And so we asked what's going on here, and they said, well, where we're going is a separatist area. It's actually controlled by rebel drug lords that are at odds with the government. And so leading up to where we're going, there's some government military posted because, at any time, they're really leery about who's going up there. So we had the pastors and our contacts had to make contact and let everybody know that we're coming, because it's a big deal if anybody's going up there. Up on top of the mountain, it's totally controlled by drug lords, and it's controlled by drug lords because there's poppy fields up on top of this mountain. Poppies, of course, used in the production of heroin. There's a village up there on top of this mountain, and the gospel has to go to the ends of the earth, even into the drug lord-controlled territories. These people are not the ones doing it. These are just villagers living their lives just like you and I. They happen to live in this village that's controlled by drug lords. The gospel has to go. And so the bravest, men who ride motorcycles and mopeds into the most treacherous locations. Why? Because the gospel has to be preached to the ends of the earth. And we don't cross the street sometimes. And we don't go next door sometimes. And we don't talk to the counter person sometimes. Yet these people are going into the most remote places. So on this mountaintop, we walked, no cameras allowed. We walked this path that was situated by poppy fields on either side, and on the top you reach this tent, this beautiful colored tent where there's a church. Now this, in all these pictures, this is a fraction of the members or the believers in this church. We were there midweek, midday, and so they couldn't get everybody together to receive us. So this is just a fraction of the people that come to this church. But what it started to hit me on this mountaintop, that many of these things that we had been experienced and would experience really served as a metaphor. Because you have this inner beauty and this inner joy, these beautiful colors that were so perfectly contrasted against this very sad and dreary outside world. We went to the Taj Mahal, as I told you, in Agra before we had gotten to Bihar. You can throw up that next picture. And this is one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, and it truly is a wonder. It really looks cut and paste. When you're looking at it from a distance, it doesn't even look real. It's a marvel of architecture and design, and it's situated in these very lovely, peaceful, tranquil setting with manicured lawns and bushes and these reflective pools. And again, even before we had gotten to Bihar, it hit me. It served as a metaphor, this beauty insulated, this joy and this peace insulated from a dreary, sad outside world. Because outside of the grounds, very heavy security to get into the Taj Mahal grounds. Outside of that is just, it's poverty and depravity. And anywhere that we saw in India where it's populated, it's waves of trash and pollution. It's not always the prettiest place. And again, it's just every man for himself kind of mentality, and there's very little decorum, and it doesn't seem like there's very much love for fellow man. So I started to see these things as metaphors, this inner beauty insulated from the outside. So I know I'm jumping around. This was first before anything. Then we got to Bihar up in the north where the orphanage is, and that's where we did our village travel. And next picture. When we were received into the orphanage, and here's just a still of them singing and dancing, and this is just what they do. They're just so filled with the joy of the Lord. It's not pretentious or fake. It wasn't just prepped up for us. It's just this genuine joy at all times. Again, in the poorest state in India, here is this orphanage, this little sanctuary, this insulated place where there can be joy juxtaposed against the outside world, perfectly creating this contrast against all that's sad and sorrowful. These are orphans. We were at one service, and 5 of them gave their testimony, and every testimony is more heart-wrenching than the first of how they got there in the first place. They're so eloquent. By the way, they run all of their services. There's nobody over 18 that's running their services. They've been trained. Not only that, they're actually teaching the village children of their village that aren't even in the orphanage. They run the services, they teach the Bible, they lead worship. So they gave their testimony, something that, I have to speak out loud. They gave their testimony, and each one is more sad than the last. Maybe they're an orphan because their parents died, or maybe they're an orphan because one parent died and the other parent just couldn't deal and took off. So there they are, 5 years old or younger, in their home, literally by themselves, having to fend for themselves. Or perhaps they were just given up for adoption because the family had too many children and they were too poor and they just couldn't survive. Or they were actually sold on the black market by their parents. So this happens every day in India, where children, just because the parents are too poor, they can't deal, or they have too many kids, will sell their child on the black market into slavery, into prostitution. So you have these children that were rescued into that, or from that, into this insulated sanctuary of peace and love in the presence of God, and that's why they are so filled with joy and nothing else. They have this unshakable joy that fills all of them. And we can see now, whether it be the Taj Mahal, whether it be the mountaintop church, whether it be the orphanage and the kids inside, or any of the other metaphors that I gave, we can see where this now becomes really a metaphor for life and a metaphor for our faith. And it's something that we lose sight of in the Western church in America. We lose sight of far too often, that no matter what is going on around me, no matter what is going on in the outside world, as a believer, if I really am a believer, I should have an unshakable joy, because there's this inward safe haven that lives inside of me in the form of the Holy Spirit that no devil and no worldly problem can take away. Nobody. There's no other book of the Bible that says the word joy more than Psalms. David, who faced so much hardship and went through so much difficulty, yet he speaks of joy more than anyone in the Bible. And in Psalm 16:11, he says, "In your presence." Doesn't speak of anything external whatsoever. No luxury, no material, no wealth, not even friendship. In your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand there are pleasures forevermore. See, we saw it at the CFC orphanage. We saw children who have no mother, they have no father, they have no family name, they have no inheritance, they have no legacy. Now, I would say that just about everybody in here has most of those things. Mother, father, maybe. Family name, some legacy, and many an inheritance. They have nothing. There's nothing in this world that can help them the way that we have, that promotes us and brings us along. They were rescued from a destitute life and live in the safe haven of the orphanage, and they're filled with joy, and they cannot stop singing and dancing. And they do so because they cling to Jesus, not because somebody just shared them a message or told them about a man, but they were literally rescued. Somebody did for them what they could not do for themselves, and then gave the reason, being a God who died for us and left his throne, became impoverished, though he was rich, became impoverished for us, and now they cling to Jesus, not because he's one of what they have, it's because he's the only thing they have. And he's the only thing that they need, and they've come to that realization. See, I often say, you've probably heard me say from the pulpit, that a gospel that cannot be preached in every corner of the earth is not an authentic gospel. What I mean by that is that in the Western world and the Western church has been dominated by this prosperity gospel for several decades, finally starting to wane a little bit, but it has really dominated, and it has given offshoots into the self-help gospel and the humanistic gospel, and just a gospel that's all about me. It's all about me and what I can get and what I can make of myself. And I've said that. You can't preach that in Bihar. You can't preach a wealth gospel in Bihar. And so if a gospel can't be preached in every corner of the earth, it's not the gospel. And after this trip, I've kind of flipped it on its head a little bit, because now I'm concerned that we can't preach an authentic gospel here. Because we've so diluted what the gospel is with so many additives, when the gospel comes down to this: blessed is the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who recognize their impoverished spiritual condition, because if they don't ever recognize it, they will never enter the kingdom of heaven. They'll never be saved. Blessed are those who realize that they have nothing, say nothing, nothing apart from Jesus. No matter how much stuff they have, money they have, wealth they have, materialism they have, no matter what they have, no matter what their legacy, their family name, whatever their status is, they have nothing. Why? Because in an eternal landscape and in an eternal sense, we have nothing apart from Jesus. Blessed be God that these children realize that they have nothing without Jesus. They're an example to us. They're so filled with joy, the joy that only comes from the presence of God. You know, one of the villages that we were in, where we actually got to see a well drilled, there's the main road, and then you enter the village, and the village is broken up into like different classes. And the higher class, that system still exists in India, the higher class is closer to the main road because they're more privileged to be closer to that main road if they need anything outside of the village. In that part of the village, there are schools and there are pharmacies. We drove past as we were driving deep, deep, deep into this jungle, as it seemed. And then the further you get, the more primitive it gets, and the less that you see, because the higher classes believe that the lower classes are not worthy of having what they have. And that includes a simple hand pump well. That the higher classes on the outer skirts of the village are closer to the main road, they would actually hinder the process of somebody coming in and drilling a well, because just for the fact they did believe that they were not worthy enough to receive clean water. So they had an open well, again, where 3 to 5 people die every year in a village like that. And they had to draw water for drinking, for bathing, for cooking, for everything. We looked inside this well. It's dirty as anything. But in a spiritual and eternal sense, we also don't deserve anything. And blessed are those who are poor in spirit, because they've realized it, that apart from Jesus in an eternal landscape, in an eternal sense, we are totally impoverished without anything. Our constant wanting, our constant longing, it only promotes boredom and apathy. Amen, somebody. Come on. Can I get a witness? Our wanting and longing only promotes boredom and apathy. The more that we get, the more that we're bored and wanting and longing. We seek joy in these temporary pleasures and these temporary hopes of somehow building our kingdom here on earth. And we so lack the fundamental byproduct of depending on Jesus, which is joy. We have, in many cases, joyless churches and joyless believers. And I don't mean that we don't laugh or smile, but we are missing the fundamental byproduct of depending on Jesus, a joy that is unshakable and a joy that does not depend on something good happening. A joy that exists, it can't be taken away. Jesus said, the joy that I give, the world cannot take it away. They did not give it. It's this fundamental byproduct of depending on Jesus. It becomes the inner sanctuary. Listen, it is the inner sanctuary as described by the metaphors that I mentioned to you earlier. The joy within us, within our hearts, in the presence of the Holy Spirit, so perfectly contrasts this dreary, dying, sorrowful world. And if we don't have that joy, listen to me, we are going to look no different than the dreary, dying, sorrowful people out there. Can I get a witness? We'll look no different. We should look different from our love and our joy. This unshakable joy that is not varied or not pushed. It's not threatened by anything that's happening to us. We have it because we have Jesus. And Jesus is all that we need. The church, Casey, you can come up. The church, we will only know this joy as those children in India know it. The church will only know this joy one of two ways. We will either become courageous enough to forsake things to depend on Him, or we will become desperate enough to forsake things to depend on Him. It only happens one of two ways. As God is trying to let us know the times that we're living in and just what hour we're at, and this great sifting has begun. The global sifting of His church, where we realize just what we really have and we don't have much. What we can lean on, and that's not much. What is really stable in this life, and it isn't much. As the global sifting happens, and continues, by the way, and gets worse, as it will. It'll either be by desperation that we lean on Christ and discover this joy again, or before that time comes, it'll be because we are courageous enough to do it, and we stop leaning on the things, depending on the things that we ought not to. Could you bow, and we're going to pray, and we're going to close.